So today we're going to talk about mental imagery as a tool across the whole curriculum.
Absolutely, because the course that we've got on at the moment on a special deal, which is completely free for parents, is about the word skills, isn't it? And so we take people through how you can teach the underlying skill of mental imagery for learning reading and spelling and handwriting. But there's so much more that we can go into. The usage of mental imagery goes right across all areas of the curriculum and also various areas of your life. So we really do need these skills to be brought to the fore and to be made aware of them and to think, how can we use them in everyday life? And of course, lots of people just use it naturally.
Yeah.
It's just something that you do, and people have got amazing memories for this, that, or the other, and people can read amazingly quickly and absorb information. They can spell seemingly easily. They can do maths and you think, wow, how can they do that? And a lot of it is down to their actual use of their thinking processes. They've got those skills, the mental imagery and the hearing, the auditory processing and the visual processing, and just working as if like magic. And for the rest of us, not quite so easy.
Well, in fairness, I would say the majority of people are using their mental imagery fairly well.
Oh yes, but perhaps not consciously for specific areas that are needed, because we're not aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Is that conscious awareness, isn't it, rather than that unconscious awareness?
It is. And also, one of the things that we do talk about is to be wary of, the term learning styles.
Oh, absolutely.
Because a lot of people think that, well, if you're a visual learner, which would be one of the terms, or you'd be an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner, is that's the only way that you can learn. That unless you are a visual learner, really using your mental imagery skills and your visual skills is seen as less important, than if you are termed an auditory learner. Then it's all about listening and maybe recording yourself for your notes to kind of play back, and it's all about discussion, etc. And then obviously kinesthetic is about doing, and we have a little bit of a bugbear around that, because the reality is that none of us are just one thing. It is more like, I know Olive Hickmott used a great analogy of the mixing desk.
The mixing desk, absolutely.
That we have all of these tools. It depends on the task. It totally and utterly depends on the task. And I think as a result of people thinking about, oh, well, unless you're a visual learner, there's not much point in kind of, talking about mental imagery and the visual processes. We're actually missing a really key element to helping everybody learn in a way that uses their senses in the right combination for the task. What tools does the task need?
Exactly, and teaching those underlying skills, because it's not just thinking, well, you've just got them or you haven't got them. There are strategies at the end of the day that can be used. And about these learning styles, I remember it must have been back in the 90s, I think, with accelerated learning, where these learning styles became and it always amazes me how education will suddenly latch onto one thing and not the other, and you kind of think, well, where's the neuroscience behind it? But no, it became common currency, and there were all these tests that were brought out, and you had to sort of tick the multiple choice questions and find out how visual you were or kinesthetic, or so I'm a visual learner, and it's what does that mean?
I actually even heard of a school that took this so seriously and so to heart that the children were tested with these inventories, which are scientifically proven, and then they had a label.
Yes, I remember that.
So I mean, the challenge for the teachers then was, how do you speak to each child according to their learning style, which is it's bonkers. But I do know that there was a meta-analysis of that done in 2004. When I was doing my master's, this was something that I discovered, and I really felt grateful for having stumbled across it, because I probably up until that point also bought into the learning styles theory, and would have used it with the students I was working with, and they actually narrowed it down to 171 different learning style inventories that were available.
Good grief.
And then they looked into, well, were they reliable and were they valid, etc., etc. And the reality was that none of them were. None of them could be replicated exactly. None of them could, when you compared them like for like, they didn't have the same results either. And at that time, I had started to think, obviously, because of empowering learning and going into the jumpstarting world, that obviously there's a lot more going on in terms of learning strategies for people.
Yes.
As they say, if all you have is a hammer, you're always looking for nails. So if that's all you think that is important, is to find out what the person's learning style is, then you kind of get down that rabbit hole, really, or a little bit of an ostrich, really, that you just stick your head in the sand and don't see it. But what was interesting was that I remember thinking, well, what if I was thinking about a different context when I'm answering the questions?
Yes.
And invariably, I would come out with a different answer. So I did know beforehand. However, the one big positive that came out of that meta-analysis was that even though the learning style inventories were not absolutely accurate and they were not scientific, what it gave was the students metacognition. They became aware of actually how did they learn.
Yes, there certainly were positives to it. And I think it also gave teachers an awareness that there are different ways of processing information, and there are different ways of presenting information that make it more accessible to more students. So if you tend to always present through a spoken lecture, then that's not very useful for everybody in the room. So therefore, if the more visuals you can introduce and more sort of practical hands-on activities you can introduce, so I think it did open up that thought that we've got different senses, and we've got different ways of processing, and we can help people learn across, using all those different modalities.
And of course, people who are involved in Montessori would say, well, we've been doing this for years, the multisensory
yes.
teaching. But we talk about something slightly different. We talk about multisensory learning. We talk about how do you actually find out what's happening inside the person.
Yes.
As opposed to how are you presenting the information, which, yes, is very helpful. It is more helpful to have multiple ways of information being presented. But the reality is it's still about actually how the person is processing that information internally. So obviously our course for parents is very much about, as you said, spelling, reading and handwriting, and the vital role that mental imagery plays in that. And obviously on the course, what we teach is how to identify it, how to establish by asking the right questions, what's actually happening for your child or your students, and then how to help that person to develop their mental imagery more and to control it through grounding. But the reality is actually, of course, this whole idea of mental imagery and being able to encode information in several different ways and linking them together goes right across the whole curriculum.
Oh, it really does. And I think from my experience, I tend to be much more slow, plodding, methodical, more auditory, and I could learn things by rote. So for example, maths, I had no real sort of natural aptitude for maths. I found maths was always a struggle for me, but I could learn things off by heart. And so I got through in those days it was O level, and I would just learn, pi r squared, I could just learn those things off by heart with very little understanding behind them. And it was really only sort of much later in life that I begun to understand the importance of having a visual image inside my mind. I never really thought about that before. Now, I'm not a very good artist, in fact, a hopeless, dreadful artist, until I did a neurolinguistic programming course, and I actually modeled artists and investigated how they look at what they're drawing and what they're painting, and got into how they're doing it. It was what in NLP we call a modeling project, nothing to do with catwalks, but to do with how people do things brilliantly. And that sort of started me on the journey of finding out, well, how do I see things, and improving my visual aptitude and so on. And I think that this is so vital, isn't it, that we can make it much more easy for people to think, well, what are my strengths about that VAK, you know, my visual, auditory or kinesthetic, what's my kind of preferred or my default or my go-to style, where is my strength? But then how can I actually build on those other areas? And of course, this goes right across the curriculum. And we do know that in order to be successful in your learning, actually the visual processing is the strongest, most important method, if you like, of learning and remembering in academia, as well as in lots of other areas.
Absolutely. And you know, again, it's that we sort of take it for granted. So if someone is very good at that, you know, we don't know what we know. We don't, when we're good at something, it's like, well, I don't know how, I'm just doing this, I'm just doing that.
Yeah.
That word just always
yeah.
jumps out at me whenever someone says that, because it's very much about, you know, finding, well, what's the internal strategy, what's actually going on inside that person. And that's where that metacognition, we think of metacognition slightly differently, don't we, as a sort of more traditional definition of metacognition. I did watch a webinar on metacognition, and I was left, this was from an education service, and I was left feeling very much that, okay, it's a discussion about how we're doing stuff, but not really to the detail that we do in terms of the senses. It was more kind of like more the external strategy as opposed to really the internal strategy.
Yes, it's not really thinking, okay, if I've got a mental image, so what we do is a kind of a forensic unpeeling of the onion, isn't it? So, well, exactly how do you see it? So when you think about, oh, for example, a word, if you're spelling a word, like, what have I got there? You know, quality. So when I think about word quality, well, what is actually happening inside my mind?
What came into my head? Quality Street chocolates.
Oh, I haven't got Quality Street chocolates by my side. It was.
No, but that's what came into my head, and I really
yes,
like
exactly. And it's sort of flashing in these sort of the purple one and the green one and the green these coming. But so that's exactly what we do, isn't it? In our course, it's really to think, okay, when I say the word quality, what happens for you inside your mind's eye? What's going on for you? And so when you start looking at the letters, well, how big are they? Are they clear? Are they blurry? Are they fuzzy? Are they very, do they seem to be very far away, or are they very close up? So where we really are taking that forensic approach to what is happening inside the mind's eye. And that's what we mean by metacognition. It's those internal operations, that internal processing. And of course,
which are generally very, very unconscious.
Very unconscious. And often people will say, well, I just know. Well, it's just there. No, I don't see anything. I don't hear anything. It's just there. But of course, our metacognition is bringing those unconscious processes really into the conscious mind, so that you know what it is that you're doing and what strategies you are using and which strategies you maybe need to build on to make your learning and, you know, just the way that you process information in life more effective and efficient for you.
And it's quite interesting because yesterday I saw on Twitter somebody was talking about the 4 steps to, you know, competence. So you start off with unconscious incompetence. So you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And then conscious incompetence. Now you know what you don't know and what's missing. You know something's not there. And then 3 is conscious competence, and then 4 is unconscious competence. So, but we actually see that as, you know, there's another step, which is this metacognition, which can be used in 2 ways. One is if you're really, really good at something. So if you're unconsciously competent, so you don't know how you're doing it. The reality is you are doing something, it's just happening very quickly and out of your conscious awareness. It's not happening by magic. There's something else that's going on that is just, it's like driving a car, you know, trying to teach somebody else. I don't even know the name of the pedals or where they are. I just know when I get into the car, it's kind of gone into my unconscious. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to driving, arriving home and wondering who's driven the car and you're the only one in it. It's gone very, very deep into just that automaticity that we talk about. So it's very good to be able to use that metacognition to establish, well, how is someone doing something really, really well? And being able to bring that to consciousness and then either streamline it or teach other people or teach yourself, whatever you want to do with it. But actually what we're really talking about is between 2 and 3, that conscious incompetence and conscious competence. So if you're consciously constantly having to think about how you do something. And he was saying, well, you can get stuck in 3. And I was thinking, well, if you're stuck at 3, then it's not the right strategy for you. It's not actually, it's too heavy. And in terms of the cognitive load, you have to go, oh, it's a little bit like, I remember meeting a boy who was 14, and he'd been at a dyslexia school for 3 years. And the only word he could spell was because.
Because he'd learned.
Because big elephants can always understand small elephants. And I was thinking, and the mother, and he was very proud of this fact. And I said, but what about all the other words that you've tried to learn in 3 years? He said, I don't know. That was the only one that really stuck. And it was probably because it had a mental image of a big elephant and a little elephant, with it. But I remember thinking, well, if I had to learn how to spell a word using mnemonics, and what did each letter stand for? Number one, it's a huge cognitive load.
Huge cognitive load.
Well, what was the sentence, rather than just the word and how the word looks? So there are all these kind of strategies and tools that people use, but the reality is there really isn't anything quicker than a mental photograph.
Oh, the visual processing is the fastest. I know you've got the figures. You're quite good at remembering how many bits per second you can process visually.
Well, in total, all our senses process, they think about 11 million bits of information per second, but 10 million of that is through our eyes.
Yes. The visual.
It's the lion's share of our learning is done through the visual sense.
It really is, and we don't teach it as a skill. When they're learning phonics, we've talked about this before. There's so much focus on the sound of the language, and not on the visual. And we've discussed how the visual has been discredited through the look and say method and so on. But so our course really talks you through how to develop really effective mental imagery. And the course that we've got on at the moment talks about it in terms of reading, writing, and handwriting. But once you've actually stabilized that mental imagery, and you know that you can keep a really stable, clear image inside your mind's eye, then that ability to use your mental imagery can be used in so many different areas, can't it? So that's what we want to talk about this morning. First of all, with the grounding, with all those investigative questions that we do about the internal processes in the mental imagery, we can really get those skills embedded, and then, my goodness, they can be used across the board in learning.
Absolutely, and we do have an online course for teachers and educators, as well, that actually does go into the rest of the curriculum. So it's a much bigger course. There's a lot more to it, because obviously you're going to be dealing with multiple children, not just multiple students, not just your own child. And in that we do have a section on maths and telling the time. And this has, for me, maths is my go-to. That is where my strength. I know
it's really funny when we talk about maths together. When we were writing the course, do you remember there were maths problems? As soon as I see a number, I just freeze. Oh my God, numbers, no, please. And then Sarah goes, yee, yippee.
And you often see that, and I often see that when I'm actually training a group of teachers at primary level. Are the ones who, so when I say the word maths, I actually am actively looking around the room to see who has gone into that freeze mode and absolute dread, and you can see the color drains. People have a very, very strong reaction to maths.
Very strong.
Really strong, and it for some people it can carry on for their entire lives, that they believe they're no good at maths.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost like a badge of honor. Oh, I'm hopeless at maths. Oh, I'm dreadful at maths. You wouldn't see anybody kind of almost bragging or nonchalantly kind of mentioning, oh, I'm hopeless at reading, or I can't spell for toffee, or anything
spelling,
like that.
Maybe I would.
Maybe spelling is a little bit like that, but no.
Reading and understanding language, no.
No. You wouldn't. In the same way that maths. Sort of, oh, and don't worry, I was always hopeless at maths. It's you find whole families sort of, oh no, nobody in our family is ever any good at maths and so on. So.
And it comes a little bit back as well to the what has now been debunked is the left and right brain.
Oh yes.
So there's the theory that either you're right-brained or you're left-brained. And it's not true at all. It's been completely debunked, and that old theory was very much like, well, either you're into the arts and language and all those sort of things, or you're into maths and science, and it's like you're either or brain, and that is very obvious. Particularly, I did A levels in the UK, and it was very difficult to do combination of what would be seen as left
Yes.
and right brain subjects. You were either doing the kind of
Yeah.
mathematical, very logical, procedural subjects, or you were doing more kind of creative. You can see obviously where my parts of the brain are for each.
Yes, this or that is, but it is this.
That's just not true.
This opposing sort of things that we've got, in all way through life. We've often talked about them, and we're going off the point now. But it's either or. It's this or that, rather than actually, it can be a whole mixture of things.
Yeah, but a lot of people think that, if they're bad at maths, then they must be more right-brained and, kind of not so organized and not able to kind of follow procedures and understand things kind of the logic. And it's complete and utter nonsense, because, well, I know from my own personal experience, I'm pretty creative, but I can also do maths as well. And I think a lot of people saw that as a little bit of an anomaly when I was younger.
But maths is incredibly creative, isn't it? It is an art form, particularly when you go further in your maths. But I think for me, the missing link was very much, I didn't visualize. And when we started talking about all this, years ago, when I met particularly with Olive Hickmott, who's this expert in mental imagery, I really hadn't been aware of what processes I was using when I was doing maths. And so I started to think about it, well, when I do, how do I do it? And a lot of it is just repetition. I would learn, 7 take away 9, you can't do it. So go over there. And I'd learned all these processes by speaking.
Yeah.
And
I was just trying on what you were saying, and I was thinking, wow, that is such so much more complex.
Yeah, and I can't do it now because I've forgotten the words, sort of thing. So I really struggle now because I don't really do written maths anymore. I've been retired for 10 years, so I haven't. My maths was only done when I was teaching maths, and I would have these long procedures, and if you've forgotten the words, you've got to go back to the beginning again because you haven't got the understanding there. And I remember when I was teaching, and I did neurolinguistic programming, and that taught me a lot more about the internal processes that the children are using. And so therefore my maths teaching did improve hugely because I was aware of helping children to think, how were they seeing the numbers, how were they seeing, and we used color a lot in, if you were doing division, how, could you see the numbers in color, could you change it, what were they doing inside their mind's eye, and then I could help them change the strategy when I realized where they were sort of making mistakes or they had errors. But for me it was a real eye-opener to think about, you actually see it in your mind's eye, you see the numbers. And so many children actually can't even see numbers clearly inside their mind's eye, and they do, like the dyslexic reversals, the P's and the B's. Well, the same thing happens in numbers, doesn't it? Often the 9s and the 6s, the 3s and the 5s, and you'll find, the 3 written sort of the wrong way round. So
the 2 and 5, I would see that.
And 2 and 5, yes, that they can be sort of transposed, and the 3 could be written, with the
wrong way.
Around the bulges to the left rather than the other. So you've got that kind of left-right transposing that's going on, that confusion there. And we know what from our experience is because there isn't a really firm, clear picture of that number inside the mind's eye. And we know that if people are trying to make sense of things, they will often turn it round, twist it in and about, particularly people
if you think about when we're babies and we're trying to figure something, and the shape sorter, well, does it work that way? No, does it work this way? So yeah, we have a natural tendency to manipulate things, trying to make sense of it and trying to see if it fits. Yeah.
So the first step really is to investigate the mental imagery for number, isn't it? And unfortunately, we don't really do that on the course that we're giving for free. It's in the teacher's course, but you can start investigating with your child. Do they see numbers inside their mind's eye? Because you can do all sorts of work early on with. We had Numicon, which are beautiful visual representations of number, and you've got the kinesthetic as well, because you can put your fingers in the holes. You can. They've got colors as well, so you can mix the colors to make sort of 4 and 6 make 10. brilliant visual stuff, and you can do all that visual play, you can do all that kinesthetic play and everything, but at the end of the day, if the child hasn't got the image inside their mind's eye when they walk out of the classroom, then it's just gone.
It's just gone.
It's just gone because it hasn't been stored effectively in that long-term memory, because it's stored in the occipital temporal
and
area,
again,
I believe.
we talk about multi-mode coding, which is that we need to use in our mind's eye, in our working memory, the different elements coming together, and just exactly the same as with words, which have a three-pronged approach. So you've got the orthographic element, how does it look? You've got the phonological, how does it sound? You've got the semantic, what does it mean? So when you actually link all those three together and you actually teach them as a whole package, as a global learning system, it's exactly the same with numbers, which actually numbers have a symbolic representation. So if we say take the number 5, so obviously we know to draw a 5, and that means 5. We then have the verbal or the linguistic code as well, which is then FIVE, which is it's written. And often in word problems, obviously that's really important, that children understand the link between the symbolic and the linguistic. And then of course we have the analog, which is like if you're thinking of the face of a die, and you've got the 5 dots, so it actually physically represents something real, something tangible. And a lot of children are missing one of those, or maybe 2 of those elements. They might hear, again, it's the auditory, you're counting all the time with babies, up the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the toes and everything else, but they're not seeing necessarily, what it is you're actually talking about. So it's really, really important, again, to check, does the child or the student have those links? Do they actually understand the connection between a symbolic number and then every other way that it's represented? It's really, really important.
Absolutely. And things we do know that people with dyslexia, and also dyscalculia is something a little bit more complex in terms of developing number sense, because some people have a real difficulty with having a number sense, getting that, it's called numerosity, getting that sense of number.
No, this was fascinating, wasn't it? To find
too technical for us to go into here, isn't it?
But to me, the very simple explanation is just literally not having a feel for numbers. That if you were to look at 2 fields full of cows, even if it was very obvious one had more cows than the other, without counting them, some people look at that and they just cannot see it. They don't have that sense of quantities. And the greater than, smaller than, and things like that. So those are really important to check as well, aren't they?
They're really important aspects, and I think we're not checking that enough. As with early reading and writing, with the early teaching of mathematics, we're not really checking that those early concepts are really secure. And the maths curriculum races on so quickly, so fast. I know in China, where they're very, very successful with their maths, and in the Far East, they don't move on until those building blocks, those very basic building blocks, are absolutely secure with the children. And a lot of it is visual training, because in China, for example, that they really are trained visually because of the Chinese characters. Yes. There's a lot more training in terms of the visual processing, and we don't do that over here. And you really need to be able to see it. So if you're to visualize numbers on a number line, you need to see it inside the mind's eye, and that is something I never did. I mean, now I can actually see it because I've taught myself to see numbers on a number line. My husband sees them actually in a circle, and I spoke to a guy. I was at the British Dyslexia Association conference, and I spoke to a guy who is he's a professor in mathematics, absolutely an amazing mathematician. He's just off the scale, brilliant. And he's dyslexic, so he cannot spell for toffee, and reading is a real struggle for him still. And some very kind person introduced me to him, and I asked him if I could possibly ask him a few questions. And I asked him about his maths, and the way he described how he saw numbers in his mind's eye was just amazing. He had different colors, different positions. He could manipulate them around, and he used shapes, and some were hazy, some were clear, and he could bring this one in over here. He was like a movie director, directing his his inner world of number.
Yeah.
And it was just breathtaking me. So I said, okay, can I just ask you about letters, words when it comes, and he said, blank.
Wow.
He had a completely blank screen for letters. He did not see letters in the same way in his mind's eye. And that for me was just, oh my word. So I said to him, well, actually, if you knew that you could see letters in a similar way that you can see numbers, do you think that would change the way that you could spell? And you could see the cogs going round. He said, oh my goodness, if I could see letters like I can see numbers, then of course I could see the word and I'd be able to spell it. So, and I've got his card. Anyway, but that really demonstrated for me how important it is to visualize numbers. And I think you're brilliant at solving problems, aren't you? About visualizing what's going.
Well, I'm okay. I don't know about brilliant, but yeah.
Oh, but it's all relative, To me, you're brilliant.
Well, when we did, so we looked into basic math, so numbers and being able to visualize numbers, and then obviously going into the next bit of maths, which is adding and then subtracting. And I suppose a little bit of a difference between words and numbers is that actually in maths you do want to be able to move them around when you need
Yes.
to. You need to be able to manipulate the information so that it's in the right order inside your head, or if particularly when you get to algebra, which a lot of people shudder. I love algebra.
Look how excited she gets, and I go, whoa.
Because to me it is just solving a puzzle. It's not the letters are arbitrary. They're not to be afraid of, but you have to be able to manipulate. And so being able to move from obviously the numbers, then adding and subtracting, and then multiplying and dividing, and that to be able to, we call it mental arithmetic. To be able to do mental arithmetic, there's only one way, and that is to see it inside your mind's eye. If you're trying to say it and repeat it, trying to hold that information and manipulate it, it's impossible, because you have to keep going back to the beginning, and there's no other way to do mental arithmetic other than mental imagery. There really isn't. You can learn your times table by rote, absolutely, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can divide. If you don't really understand the relationship between them.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that you can dodge around either, because if you ask me 7 5s, I've I'll have to go back to 5 5s, 25, 6 5, 7 5. I have to go back a little way to kind of lead myself into it. 5s are probably quite easy, but something like my 7 times table, I probably need to have a little bit of a run in.
Apparently is the most difficult one to remember. Most people really struggle with that. It's 56, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't there.
Just anyone's watching, just and there's a lot of arguments against kind of learning the times table. Go, well, what's the point? If it's a struggle for a child, why are we bothering, to teach it to them, and why are we bothering to kind of, make them learn it? And of course, it's a little bit like the spelling list, isn't it? It's like, here's your list for Friday, go away and learn it. And it's like, well, here's your times table for the week. Here are your multiplication facts, apologies, for the week. We're going to test you on them. And then it's these quick fire, rounds in maths. It's like, how fast can you get there? But if you haven't got it, you're really putting a lot of pressure. And then, of course, the stress of a lot of children. And people say, well, you've got your fingers, so you've got a calculator. Why bother learning it? And again, it's back to that whole thing we spoke about a few weeks ago, which is cognitive load in the working memory. The more automatically you can remember things, more automaticity you have around things, the less cognitive load you've got going on, and you can start to think about things that are more complex. Whereas if you're stuck at the 5 times 7 in an algebra equation, and it becomes more and more complex, people get lost, and there's no need to do that. You just have to make sure that they've got those skills really, really early on.
Absolutely, because it's not only times tables, it's basic number bonds, because some children at the age of 5, when they first start doing it, just simply getting 6 and 4 is 10, 7 and 3, those number bonds to 10, and then thinking about 17 and 3, getting your number bonds to 20, and then thinking about 70 and 30, getting those up to 100. Those basic number bonds, some children just don't get them automatically, and of course you can imagine how incredibly difficult that makes it. So you can't easily do that mental arithmetic inside your head, and then of course the rest of the class are zooming on, and you've got left behind really at a very early phase, because it's just such a struggle.
And I always say maths is like building a skyscraper.
Yeah.
Don't have really good foundations, the rest is not going to stand up. And then if you miss a floor, if you miss a key concept,
yes,
you cannot keep building. And that person can often be kind of like, well, I was okay in primary school up until this point. And I often ask them, well, what happened? And they go, well, I was off sick for a couple of weeks, and
yes,
and they miss something vital. And of course the teachers can't keep going back over and over and over things, but obviously if something's missing, my question is always, if you're asking a question at this level, there's no point in talking about it at this level. You've got to go back and investigate, well, what's missing that is actually would be holding that information up. So I always say, never be afraid to go backwards in maths. Never be afraid to go right back to the basics if you need to. To find out where the missing link, where the missing floor is.
And to be fair, I mean, that's what a lot of catch-up programs in schools are all about, sort of tracking back to finding where is that missing concept. But the problem is, when they get back to where is that missing concept, they don't know how to teach the underlying skill that's going to allow the child to get that missing concept. So you end up a bit like the phonics. You go over and over and over doing the same sort of strategy about, I've got 6 marbles, how many more do I, but how are we actually going to teach them to get those number bonds? And of course, it comes back to what we're saying. We need to teach them how to visualize. How are they going to get that mental picture inside their mind's eye of 6 and 4 and the 10? And as I'm saying it now, I've actually got the 6 and the 4 and the 10. So one of the ways that we do it is with triangles, isn't it? That we have that visual picture of a triangle, and then you've got 10 at the top, and then you've got 6 and 4 at the bottom, so that you can, it's the relationship of 6 and 4 making 10.
And actually, well, I was looking for these for ages, and then they popped up in a cupboard I was clearing out during lockdown. It's always very useful. And this is a very interesting little gizmo. So this is a little whiteboard. I'll do the addition.
Oh, right.
So using a triangle, you can actually keep changing it around. So you can have the 10 at the top, and then the 6 here and a 4 here. This is traditionally,
lovely.
Obviously,
yes.
What you've got are 4 mathematical facts in one diagram. So you would kind of take this away for the moment. You wouldn't have these in the middle. And you would just show the relationship. I would have an addition sign here and a subtract here and a subtract here to show the relationship between these 3 numbers. And it's a very clever little gizmo. I don't really know exactly where it came from originally.
That's really good. I haven't seen that before. Yeah.
Well, the whole idea of triangles, and then on this side you've got the multiplication. Now you wouldn't be using the triangles simultaneously for addition and multiplication. You would want to start with one, make sure they're really embedded and they've become automatic, and then obviously you would move on to same thing with multiplication. So if you had 7 and 8 and 56 here, 7 times 8 and 8 times 7 is the same, and 56 divided by 8 is 7, and 56 divided by 7 is 8. So again, you're representing those formats. So I found this. So this is a whiteboard. So this cleans off.
Oh, that's really useful. So by doing that, you can first of all make sure that they can stabilize their mental imagery, that they really can see separate numbers inside their mind's eye. They've got an understanding of what those numbers actually represent. As Sarah said, what is 9? Can I kind of recognize 9 in different, and then with the triangles, you can get that picture inside the mind's eye.
And I actually found these that I had made for my own primary school. Now they're not exactly the way we would have them now, because we would have the multiplication. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes.
So there's a whole, they're on a little ring. I've got a whole series of them, and so that's how he learned his multiplication tables.
Yeah, and you can put them on Post-its and put them up on the wall. And also, because if you're learning your tables off straight down like that, then you get the kind of 1 2 3 2 3 6 3 3, and you have to do that sort of going all the way down. You want to separate them out, so
exactly the same as we talk about for spelling.
With the spelling. So each multiplication fact is split up onto a different Post-it, and then of course you can move them around, because you don't want to get them, you have to be in that particular position or that linear way. So you can, if the child prefers to do it in that linear fashion, 3 times 2 is 6, you can put those up. But the triangles really work so well to get the multiplication and the division, to get those relationships with the numbers there.
Maths is about two things. It's about patterns and relationships.
It is. And do you know, now you've done 7, 8, 56, I've got that triangle in my mind, and I can just see it there, the 56 cents. And you kind of think that would be fixed now.
That's fixed. It's a fixed image, and it's stored in the long-term memory. And then when you need to when you see the two of those numbers, you know what the missing one is. You know straight away what's missing.
I would have to revise. You know, I'd have to recap and review.
Well, I will give you a little secret how I know that one, which is 56 is equal to 7 times 8, so it's 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh wow! There you go. There you go.
It's not just a triangle. Well, I never used the triangles. I actually learned all of my multiplication facts first in Arabic and then in English.
Oh, and how did you learn yours?
Well, it must have been rote, because I learned them in the 70s, so I would have thought it was rote. But I have a very, very visual. I have a pretty good visual working memory.
You do, because you're very speedy visualizer, and you get things.
But particularly when it comes to maths, and then when we started, what was really interesting was when we started to look at word problems in math. It was a really interesting, because we would read out a word problem, and then we would check, well, what's happening for you and what's happening for me, and again. No two brains are the same, and no two brains are going to process the information. And I suppose what I love about maths is that sometimes there's multiple ways to get the answer. There's not one route. Now, of course, if I'm trying to tell my children that, they won't agree with me. It's got to be the way the teacher's doing it, which sometimes is really confusing. I'm like, why have they changed maths? Why have they changed the way the logic? Why are they doing it with it upside down? It just doesn't work in my brain. But what's really interesting about word problems is, of course, there can be two problems for a child. One is that, because sometimes dyslexia and dyscalculia can go hand in hand.
Yes.
So if they're having a problem actually reading the words in the problem and then translating it into, well, what does it actually mean? It's not even the maths that's the problem, it's the English that's the problem.
Yes.
You know, and understanding what is the question actually asking. And of course, when we started to look at, again, that sort of link between you know, the multi-mode coding of a mathematical symbol. So the mathematical symbol is, say, the plus sign or the addition sign. And then you have obviously the analog. Well, what is it doing? Well, it's combining two quantities together. And then you get to the linguistic aspect of it. And you have this huge list of all the different ways.
Oh gosh, the language around just addition, you know, total, sum of, altogether. It goes on, I think about 10, 12 more. There's
probably more. We can find a definitive amount, because again, language is so adaptable and so flexible. There's so many different ways of saying the same thing. But again, sort of layering in, and you could be taught one way in the classroom, and then the maths problem actually asks it a slightly different way, because it's created by somebody else. And if you're used to that and you know it and you understand it, you don't even see it. It's not something that jumps out the page as being, you know, a difficult, this could present a difficulty. And then, of course, for me, I always say maths problem is translating English into maths. You know, what is the relevant information? What is the mathematical, what are the numbers? What are the symbols that you now need to extract out of that, translate it into the language of maths? To be able to then do it, and then disregard, you know, well, it doesn't matter if it was Susan buying 6 apples or Simon, who cares, you know? It's like it's relevant.
Absolutely, because that could be more confusing, because when you've got a problem, often we teach children to visualize and make a story up of Susan going into the shop and buying 3 apples at, you know, 15p. So you can see the visualization of the story. And then the gap then is to get the visualization of the mathematical computation that needs to arise from that. And that often is the missing step, isn't it? From the real life story into, okay, then what is the visual representation of that in mathematical terms? And that is a skill which we don't really explicitly do. I mean, I don't know, I'm talking, you know, sort of years ago, but for me, that is.
I mean, I have a 10-year-old, and I know.
Oh yeah, so
you know. He's lucky. Obviously, he's inherited his mathematical ability from me, being able to do long division standing on his head.
Literally.
I was really impressed. I was like, well, look, if you can do it literally standing on your head, then I don't have any leg to stand on. in terms of getting him to do more. That was his deal with me. He said, if I can prove to you that I can do it standing on my head, but do I have to do all of it? And of course I was thinking he's never going to be able to do this, and then he did. But again, mathematical, the problem solving, I actually could see as more of a problem for him. So he's brilliant when it's just numbers.
Yes.
If it's just the numbers and I'm just right around, and he knows his multiplication tables inside out, back to front, he knows the division aspect of it. It was actually it was reading a question and then knowing, well, what is it actually asking you?
Yeah.
What is actually happening? So that's where our work, actually, I could see there was a gap for him, even though he could add and subtract before he went to school.
Yes, I remember that wonderful question so many children used to ask me, Miss, is it an ad? Is it an ad?
Is it that one? And then it's guessing. And then it's
just that's right. Oh, maybe
yes, in maths, it's got to be precise.
Yeah.
There is no room for guesswork. Well, I say that and then.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's a little sort of visit around how important it is to have effective internal mental imagery for number. And just quickly, telling the time, because a lot of people with dyslexia have great difficulty in telling the time. I mean, I have struggled, for years and years, pages and pages of printed clocks in maths books, to try and get time in there. And I was working with a young chap, 13, severely dyslexic, a whole load of complex issues. And I started to investigate what happened for him when he thought about a clock. And we were thinking about how the hands go round. And the first thing was he had absolutely no mental picture of the clock face. It just didn't appear inside his mind's eye at all. And then he had such difficulty with left and right. So one hand was going around this way, and then another one was sort of randomly going around in another way. There was no orientation.
That makes me feel a bit weird, actually, just trying that on inside my head. I'm thinking,
he just couldn't get the idea of the direction of the hands, and so even when I've got the circle of the, so we had to start right back, at getting a sort of a circle, getting to actually picture a circle inside his mind's eye and make that stable and clear and fixed. And then we could actually put the numbers on the circle bit by bit. Took quite some time. And then we had to work on the orientation of how we were moving around. So that's just something, that's just another bit. And of course I didn't know that when I was teaching, and it was a mystery to me how I would show them the clock, and we would see there's 12 there, and there's a 6 there, and you assume, because you're showing them the clock, oh, well, there you got it.
Yeah.
And then you assume that you've got, it goes around this way, and you assume that they're seeing it going around that way, the same way. But until you actually ask them,
you don't.
Show me what what you see. And this is our message, isn't it?
It is our message. It's to continuously
we need to ask and find out.
Take that approach of being curious as to, they're not lazy, they're not stupid, they're not, there's nothing wrong with the person. They're just simply not using the right tool inside their brain. And if they're highly visual, then they're great creatively, and they, if they're great with numbers and words but they can't tell the time, it's like, well, actually they've already got the tool, they're just not using it.
Yes, they're not using it in that particular context.
Yeah, you can map it across. And telling the time.
Absolutely.
When we actually went down and we started creating the telling of the time module, this is on the teacher's course.
Oh yeah.
We were absolutely gobsmacked, because we can both tell the time, and again it becomes very automatic. And if I said, for example, if I said 8:45, well, I know, we were doing this. We were playing around with obviously the relationship then between the digital clock and the analog clock. Is what I see the time on an analog clock, even though someone's told me digitally, because that's how I was taught. But of course, with phones and with computers and with most of what's going on, most of the time is actually displayed as digital.
Yeah.
So you have no relationship. You don't have in your mind's eye. So now I can see it's 9:49, 9:29. You can't see the relationship that easily on from a digital point of view, whereas on an analog it's much easier to see which way are you going and everything else. But of course, if you don't have the mental imagery and you can't connect those two, at all. And telling the time, the whole, again, back to a little bit like mathematical symbols, you know, how we describe the time is incredibly
It
complicated.
really is.
You know, we have a minute hand, we have we have the hour, you know, God, the big hand, the small hand, and the seconds. And then we've got, well, the second hand is not actually measuring seconds, it's measuring minutes. And it's like, you know, we have quite a complex, when you look at other languages, that some of them are much more simple in terms of telling the time.
It is, yes.
In English, it's there's all kinds of ways of saying the same time, you know, in different ways. So again, you've got those multiple things, and if you're not sure which one's which and how do you connect them together, and of course it's the visual is the main way in.
It really is, and I think, you know, it's very hard because often people find it very difficult to plan their time. So if the train is leaving at 10:15, you know, what time do I need to, you know, get up in the morning or to have breakfast? And I think if you haven't got a kind of a mental picture of the clock and the passing of time, it's quite difficult to, because then you've got to plan mathematically, haven't you? So 10:15, I mean, for me, I would have a picture of that and think, well, okay, I know that it takes me sort of half an hour to have a shower, therefore that's, then you sort of go back and you can sort of track that time. And then you, okay, well, I know I need to go up at 8 o'clock, I need to have my breakfast. So, but to do all those sorts of things.
They don't, you know, people get very cross, obviously, for people who are very poor timekeepers.
Yes.
And a lot of it is, again, it's that they're missing the strategy, the mental imagery strategy.
Yes.
Being able to see the clock and be able to work backwards.
Yes.
And know how long things take. You know, so, and time is well, I mean, you know, we can have a whole big philosophical discussion.
Yes, exactly. Of what is time?
It's incredibly complex, and I think, but it's so important to be able to do it, because obviously it plays a big role in our lives in terms of being on time and keeping time and knowing how long things take, and even something as simple as doing an exam or a test. Yes. You know, and knowing you have an hour and a half or 2 hours to do something, and being able to plan your time accordingly. So to make sure you don't run out of time. So yeah, time is fascinating, and
it's
we
fascinating.
Really, you know, we got so kind of like, wow, what an eye opener as we started to look at the relationship, really, you know, between the visual and the auditory, and again the kind of the kinesthetic, that kind of sense of time as well. You know, is missing for so many. That left and right is so crucial for it.
It is, and you just talking about, you know, time in general life. It's, you know, mental imagery is so useful in so many respects. So, for example, often I come out of the supermarket and I think, where did I park that car? And of course, it's because I was paying no attention.
The airport, because you've been gone for so long.
The airport, you've got me. No, I've actually written it down. You know, level 5. You know, I'm actually meticulous at keeping it. But it's more for me the supermarket, because I just wasn't paying attention. I just parked the car and thinking about what I'm going to get and what I'm going to do. Not that I go to a supermarket anymore, but then, but it's that quality of the attention that you're paying at the time. So where did you leave your car keys? Where have you put this? Where, you know, it's again creating that mental image inside your mind's eye that you can go, okay, that's where I parked the car, stored. Give it that second. Of course, I'm using the car park, but it's for, you know, lots of things in life. You know, where you've put that, where you've done that. You know, things that you need to remember. It's taking that photograph and storing it consciously.
Absolutely, and it's great because Olive's actually watching. So hi, Olive.
Oh, is Olive watching? Oh, right, the queen of mental imagery.
And Des has written a lovely little comment here, which is, you know, it's been a brilliant series, and you know, well done to us, and to thank you.
Oh, thank you for being with us.
But I do remember having a conversation with Olive about you know, OCD, obsession compulsive disorder, and for some of them, you know, the ones where you keep locking, people keep locking their doors, you know, multiple times, and they don't know if they've done it. And of course, Olive, just because she has a PhD in stating the bleeding obvious, everything is hilarious. She's like, well, obviously they're not taking a mental image and storing it of themselves actually doing it. And I thought, of course that has to be it, because if you do something and you don't have any little video of yourself doing it or an image of yourself doing it, and that's gone because you were maybe thinking about something else or whatever, and your brain is trying to recall it, it's not in there. And again, the only way is visual.
Yes.
It really is. It's the only way to really kind of have a very definite, you know, knowing, yes, I definitely did this, rather than just a feeling or you know, because the feeling can be related to any time. You know, make sure it's an image of what you're wearing at the time, you know, when you see your sleeve or whatever. But I just thought that's brilliant, and you know, there's that kind of genius element of mental imagery. In fact, when the likes of Thomas G. West, who's written lots of books like Thinking Like Einstein and In the Mind's Eye, who's also dyslexic himself, actually investigated what was actually happening for people who are considered, you know, genius in their time and even now. And often it was their mental imagery ability, their ability to see things in their mind's eye, things that did exist and things that didn't exist, to be able to picture things. Like Faraday could picture, you know, the electromagnetic field. He could actually see the lines in his mind's eye. Apparently he wasn't very good at maths. However,
really,
yeah, the images that actually he drew from his mental imagery mathematically were correct.
Good heavens.
I mean, how remarkable is that? It just shows really the power of mental imagery and how important it is. So we really could talk about mental imagery forever.
We could, because I just want to say, you know, how I used it across the curriculum. So, for example, you've done a science experiment, you know, I said to children, take a photo of it. So if you've set up an electrical circuit, you've got that, take a photo of it. Have you got it stored? Store that mental image. And then it's how important it is. And we actually found some backup research, didn't we, for about how you see words on objects. And I know Olive, this was the foundation of Olive's work, and we did actually find some research to do with that. It's called dual coding. A guy called Oliver Caviglioli, that if you put the image on the object that you're trying to remember, that eases the cognitive load.
So as opposed to more traditionally be an arrow, or it would, you know, the word there, or it would be above, or it would be below, but not often actually on.
That's right. So if you're learning, I don't know, the parts of a plant or the digestive system or whatever, then, you know, helping your child by actually making the label of the word and putting it on the actual object is really going to help them. And then of course you've got the course which will tell you how to get that word in the mind's eye, how to get those pictures. So we've gabbled a bit because we're coming to the end.
We are coming to the end. I think we've done fairly well to kind of keep to time. We've got a hang of it. We got a feel for it, I think, towards the end. So I suppose we'd just like to just again reiterate that the online course for parents is free, and it will be free really for as long as we can. The educators course is not free currently, but it's a huge, I mean, amazing value for anyone who is in education and working either with a mainstream class or in learning support, in terms of really giving you those skills to be able to go down that path of investigating what's actually happening and what specifically is missing in terms of the strategies, you know, for the learner who's struggling in any way, shape or form, and how you can help that learner to then fill in that gap. And we'd love feedback. We love to hear how people are getting on. And you know, so if anyone has done it, and of course, we're more than happy for you to share our videos and to share those links as well. It's not just for people who are watching. We've had a very interesting couple of months doing this. It's been
yes, because it's just us chatting on a Wednesday morning, and thank you everybody for just watching us chatter.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful because you know, as the week goes on, we just see the number of views, you know, goes up and up and up, and the number of shares, and it really does, you know. Well, otherwise we would just be talking to ourselves at the end of the day. So it's quite nice to know people are actually out there and have found it interesting and useful.
Yeah.
So we're going to leave you guys there. We really wish you all the best with your child or with yourself, if this has been useful for you, and obviously with your students when the schools go back as well. And we just want to say a big thank you.
Thank you so much
for these talks, and have a wonderful rest of the summer. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be back later in the year.
I'm sure we'll be back later.
Yeah, we've enjoyed them too much not to do them. So we'll see everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everybody.